to YouTube videos.
Oh, hi, thanks for checking in. I'm still a piece of garbage.
Army Rangers versus Crips shootout of 1989. In the late summer of 1989, the hilltop neighborhood of Tacoma, Washington, was a place where fear had become part of daily life. On the night of September 23rd, that fear exploded into open gunfire. For somewhere between 10 and 30 minutes, bullets cracked through the air on a quiet residential street called Ash Street. On one side were members of a local street gang linked to drug dealing. On the other side were off-duty United States Army Rangers, elite soldiers from the 2nd Ranger Battalion based at nearby Fort Lewis. What happened that night became known as the Ash Street Shootout. It was not a planned military operation. It was not a police raid. It was a spontaneous, chaotic confrontation between highly trained soldiers defending a home and a group of young men who had turned a neighborhood into an open-air drug market. This is the story of that night, the people involved, the neighborhood that produced it, and the larger forces that made such a clash possible. To understand the shootout, you first have to understand Hilltop in the late 1980s. Tacoma sits along the southern end of Puget Sound, about 30 miles south of Seattle. Hilltop is a residential area on a rise above downtown. For decades, it had been a working-class neighborhood with modest homes, corner stores, and a mix of families. By the mid-1980s, however, it had become one of the most dangerous places in the Pacific Northwest. The crack cocaine epidemic was sweeping across the United States. Crack was cheap, highly addictive, and enormously profitable. Street gangs from Los Angeles, especially the Crips, began expanding their territory north along Interstate 5. They looked for new markets where the police were less prepared and the competition was weaker. Tacoma fit that description. In the early 1980s, some Cuban refugees who had arrived during the Mariel boat lift took control of parts of the local drug trade. Violence followed. Then California Crips began organizing local young men. A power struggle broke out. By the late 1980s, the Hilltop Crips had largely won that struggle. Open drug dealing became common. Dealers stood on sidewalks waving down cars. Gang members wore colors openly. Gunfire was a regular sound at night. Drive-by shootings increased. Homicides rose sharply. In 1988, Tacoma recorded its first clearly gang-related homicide. A Hilltop Crip named Bernard Houston was shot and killed on a street corner. That killing marked the beginning of a wave of violence. By 1989, the neighborhood felt out of control. Residents reported that police response times were slow. Many people felt abandoned. Some families moved out if they could. Others stayed and tried to hold on. Into this environment came Staff Sergeant William Falk, better known as Bill Falk. Falk was a 12-year veteran of the Army and a member of the 2nd Ranger Battalion. Rangers are light infantry specialists trained for rapid, high-intensity missions. They are selected for physical toughness, mental discipline, and the ability to operate under extreme stress. Falk had completed Ranger School and had seen combat in Panama. He was 32 years old in 1989. In 1987, Falk and his wife bought a rundown house on South Ash Street for $10,000. The house was boarded up and in poor condition. Falk saw it as an investment. He planned to restore it. He believed the neighborhood might improve. Instead, conditions grew worse. Across the street stood a small yellow bungalow that neighbors said was a crack house. Dealers and buyers came and went at all hours. Falk watched the traffic. He grew frustrated. He began documenting what he saw. He took photographs. He recorded license plates. He set up a video camera in an upstairs window aimed at the house across the street. The people at the suspected drug house noticed. They threw rotten fruit at the camera. They shot at it with BB guns. They made threats. Falk confronted them. He told them that if they did not want to be filmed, they should stop selling drugs. The confrontation only raised the tension. Falk was not acting alone. Other longtime residents were also angry. They felt the police were not doing enough. In the months before the shootout, community meetings drew large crowds. Residents demanded action. A local newspaper published a story describing neighbors as being on the verge of vigilante action. The publicity temporarily slowed the open dealing, which only seemed to anger the dealers further. On Saturday, September 23, 1989, Falk decided to host a neighborhood barbecue. The idea was to show unity and reclaim the street in a public way. He invited neighbors. He also invited friends from the Ranger Battalion. He suggested they come prepared. Families with children were present early in the day. Food was cooking. People talked, but the mood was uneasy. Throughout the afternoon, cars drove slowly past the house. Occupants pointed fingers like guns and mouthed the words "boom, boom." They yelled threats and insults. The message was clear. Around 6:30 that evening, a car rolled down the street and someone fired a shot into the air. It was a warning. Falk recognized the danger. Families with children left. He sent his own wife away for safety. Then he called Fort Lewis. He contacted the staff duty officers and asked them to send every available ranger to his house. His message was direct. He was about to come under attack. Between 10 and 15 rangers responded. They arrived with their personal firearms. These were not military-issue weapons from the arms room. They were privately owned handguns, shotguns, and semi-automatic rifles. The soldiers took up defensive positions around the house and in the yard. They prepared for a fight. At approximately 9:20 that night, the shooting started. According to multiple witnesses, the first shots came from the direction of the suspected drug house and from positions on the street. The Rangers returned fire. What followed was a sustained exchange of gunfire that lasted somewhere between 5 and 30 minutes, depending on the account. Witnesses later said hundreds of rounds were fired. Some estimates placed the total between 100 and 300 rounds. Bullets struck houses, cars, and fences. Windows shattered. The sound of automatic and semi-automatic weapons echoed through the residential streets. Falk later described the moment. The shooting began as similar to a military firing range when the command "commence fire" is given. Gunfire came from multiple directions. He said the Rangers were attacked from the front and the rear. The soldiers held their positions. They fired carefully. Falk later claimed that he had told the Rangers to avoid hitting anyone if possible, partly out of concern for legal consequences. Official police reports stated that no one was injured. Falk has maintained over the years that some of the attackers were hit and were carried away by their companions before police arrived. Eventually, the gunfire slowed and then stopped. Tacoma police arrived in force. Most of the people on the gang side fled. 2 young men were arrested. They were identified as associates of the local Crips. One was charged with assault. The other was released. Police confiscated the Rangers' weapons for the night. The soldiers themselves were not arrested. No charges were filed against them. The next day, the story was national news. Newspapers across the country carried accounts of Army Rangers exchanging fire with drug dealers on an American street. Television crews came to Ash Street. Local police officials expressed mixed reactions. Some praised the residents for standing up. Others criticized the Rangers for not calling the police earlier and for taking the law into their own hands. Police Chief Ray F. Jetland said the incident might have been avoided if residents had contacted officers before the situation escalated. Falk responded that police response times had been too slow for too long. The Army's reaction was cautious. Officials at Fort Lewis stated that the Rangers had acted in self-defense. They would not punish or transfer the soldiers involved. At the same time, the publicity created problems inside the military. Falk later said he was told that the incident had made him too well known for the wrong reasons and that it would hurt his chances for promotion. Other Rangers were temporarily ordered not to visit his house. Falk remained in the Army for a few more years and left the service in 1993. The shootout did not end the drug problem in Hilltop overnight, but it did mark a turning point. National attention brought pressure. Community organizing increased. Residents formed stronger neighborhood groups. Police began shifting toward more community-oriented approaches. Over the following years, increased patrols, targeted enforcement, and resident activism gradually reduced the open drug markets and the level of street violence. Hilltop is a very different place today. The same house that Falk defended is now worth many times what he paid for it. The neighborhood is quieter. Looking back, the Ash Street Shootout sits at the intersection of several larger American stories. One is the story of the crack epidemic and the rapid expansion of street gangs into mid-sized cities that were unprepared for the scale of the violence. Another is the story of military families living off base in communities that were deteriorating. Rangers and other soldiers from Fort Lewis had homes throughout the Tacoma area. Some of them watched the same decline that Falk watched. A third story is about the limits of policing in the late 1980s. Departments across the country were struggling to respond to a new kind of drug-driven violence. Response times lagged. Trust between residents and police eroded. The Rangers who showed up that night were not acting as a military unit under orders. They were off-duty soldiers answering a call from one of their own. Their training, however, shaped how they responded. They took positions. They controlled their fire. They held ground until civilian authorities arrived. In that sense, the event revealed both the professionalism of the men and the vacuum that existed in the neighborhood. Bill Falk has spoken about the night many times in the years since. He has described the frustration of watching open drug dealing and feeling that official systems were failing. He has described the decision to call for help from his fellow Rangers. He has described the sudden intensity of the gunfire and the strange quiet that followed when the police finally arrived. He has also described the complicated aftermath, including the mixed reaction from the army and the long-term effects on his career. Some accounts of the shootout have grown more dramatic over time. Details vary slightly depending on the source. The number of rounds fired is estimated rather than exact. The exact duration of the exchange is debated. Whether anyone on the gang's side was wounded remains a point of disagreement between official reports and Falk's later statements. What is not in dispute is that a sustained exchange of gunfire took place on a residential street between off-duty Rangers and a group of suspected drug dealers, that hundreds of rounds were fired, and that no one was killed. The event has become part of local folklore in Tacoma and part of military storytelling among Rangers and veterans. It is often retold as an example of soldiers refusing to be driven from their homes. It is also used as a case study in how neighborhoods can reach a breaking point when crime becomes too visible and too constant. The story offers several strong narrative threads. There is the personal story of Bill Falk, a career soldier who bought a house hopping for a better future and found himself in a private war. There is the larger social story of a neighborhood transformed by the crack trade and gang expansion. There is the institutional story of police and military responses to an unexpected crisis. And there is the human story of ordinary residents who had grown tired of living in fear. The night of September 23, 1989, did not solve the problems of Hilltop. It did, however, force those problems into the national conversation. For a brief window of time, the country looked at a single street in Tacoma and saw a larger failure. The Rangers who answered Falk's call did not set out to make a statement. They set out to protect a friend and a house. In doing so, they produced one of the most unusual armed confrontations in modern American domestic history. Today, the physical scars of that night are gone. The bullet holes have been repaired. The houses have been maintained or renovated. Children play on streets that once echoed with gunfire. The story remains, however. It remains because it captures a moment when the lines between military training, civilian life, and street crime blurred in a way that few people expected. It remains because it shows what can happen when a community feels abandoned, and a group of trained men decides they will not abandon one of their own. The Ash Street Shootout was not a victory in any traditional sense. No one won medals. No one claimed a strategic success. It was a messy, dangerous, and ultimately unresolved clash that left everyone involved changed. For the Rangers, it was a reminder that the skills they learned for foreign battlefields could be needed on American streets. For the neighborhood, it was a wake-up call that something had to change. For the rest of the country, it was a brief, startling look at the human cost of the crack epidemic and the limits of order in a city under pressure. More than 3 decades later, the event continues to be discussed, debated, and remembered. It stands as a stark example of a time when ordinary streets became battlegrounds and when elite soldiers found themselves fighting not in a distant war zone, but on the front porch of a home in Tacoma, Washington. The gunfire has long since faded. The questions it raised about community, safety, responsibility, and the role of trained citizens in moments of crisis have not. That is the story of the Ash Street Shootout, a single night in 1989 when the worlds of the United States Army Rangers and the street-level drug trade collided in a residential neighborhood, leaving behind a legacy that still echoes whenever the tale is told.
That's all, Zipsters! Like and subscribe!